So, in this module we will actually be looking at the shell, what is a shell, why do we have to use a shell, and some very simple commands on file handling. So, shell is nothing but a tool to execute the user commands. So, when a system is actually booted up, the OS is actually starting up, and then the first functionality is the kernel image is actually going to get loaded in my memory, and it is actually going to start execution. But as far as the end user is concerned, the end user requires an interface to run the different kinds of commands that you want to run on the system and then make use of the system. So, the designers of the Unix operating system basically gave a program called as a shell, so that this gives an interface to the user to run the command whatever he intends to do at that particular point in time, and the shell is expected that it first validates the command that the user has actually entered. Once it has been validated successfully, it goes and executes that command that the user has given right now, and then acts on the output of the command. So, either by displaying the output onto the standard terminal, or by taking the output to a different location, and so on and so forth. So, shell is basically a very powerful utility without which the end users will not be able to really make use of the system to the most optimal extent. So, why is it actually called a shell? Because as we were saying right now, this particular shell program is the one that is sort of abstracting all the complicated internal details that the operating system needs to do for providing the different services to the end user, and makes it very simple, by which the user is just needing to understand and remember what command to run for his particular requirement, run the command, and then the output automatically gets appropriately displayed to the user. So, commands are basically input into a text terminal, and this text terminal could either be a window in a graphical environment, or it could be even a console window that is actually directly connected into the hardware system. Now, when will the user typically get a shell process to make the commands execute for him? So, the user goes through what is called as a login process, wherein in a Unix system being a multi-user system, every user is actually provided with a separate login and a separate password, and the user authenticates, the system basically authenticates the user depending on whether the user has actually typed the correct login and the password combination for that particular user. So, assuming that the user has actually given the correct username and the password combination, the system, after doing the authentication of this combination, provides the user with a shell process, and the shell process displays a prompt, what is very popularly called as a shell prompt in different Unix literature, in which the user is expected to type all the commands one by one that he wants the shell to execute for him, right. So, the results will also be either displayed on the terminal, or it could be on the console window, depending on where the commands has been given, and later on in the modules we will see how we could also have the set of results not displayed on the terminal, but actually sort of what we call as redirected to some other location in my system. So, be it some file in my file system, or to another terminal, and so on and so forth. So, we will also see subsequently in other modules down below, where we will be also talking about how the different kinds of commands could be typically automated by writing what is called as a shell script. So, some of us would have already have experience about programming in different kinds of languages. So, we will introduce a language called as a shell script language, with which we will be able to write programs or scripts that could actually automate a lot of tasks, and sometimes it could be very complex tasks also, and very easily automated. And just like a normal programming language, the shell scripting language also gives us the mechanism of having variables. So, different kinds of Boolean operations, right, different kinds of iterations, loops like for, while, and so on. So, we will see all these possibilities of how we could write shell scripts from a very simple shell script to a very complicated shell script. So, there are different types of shells that you would be coming across. The first and the foremost, the original shell was actually called as SH, and it was referred to internally as a bone shell. The name bone shell came in with the memory of the person who actually written this program. He was named as Steve Bone, and on his name this shell was also given the name of the bone shell. Right now this particular bone shell is a slightly old archaic version, and it sort of obsoleted with the latest Unix distributions not having this type of shell, but that is actually the first shell that actually came out as the most popular shell. Then you have something called as CSH, which stands for the she shell. The basic reason behind why this particular shell was called as she shell was that the syntax of its scripting language was very similar to the C programming language. So, it had a very similar syntax to the C programming language from which it derived the name of C shell for itself, and that again is something which is obsolete with not many Unix distributions supporting it nowadays. Then you have something called as a TCSH, which is again an expanded C shell with more added features as compared to the original CSH, but the most popular shell that is actually used today is what is called as bash, right. So, bash stands for bone again shell, and it is like the latest avatar of the original bone shell that had come out with a lot of features in such a way that it has become so popular that bash shell is right now the default shell that is actually provided for every user ID that has been created on any Unix system today. So, whether you take a Linux or a Solaris or a HPUX or a AX, by default you will find today that by default you have the bash shell assigned for any kind of a user who is actually created on the system. Of course, if the user wants or is having a specific preference that he would like to have only a particular shell, maybe he is actually a big fan of TCSH or some other shell, that could be getting changed, but the default shell that actually gets assigned for a user in almost all kinds of Unix distributions today is nothing but the bash shell. So, we will also be seeing subsequently in the later on modules on how we would actually be making use of the bash shell, what are the different scripting syntaxes that you need to follow as far as a bash shell is concerned and so on, so that we get some sort of a comfort feeling on at least writing some simple bash scripts for automating some of our very repetitive jobs on our Unix system. So, some very basic set of commands. The ls command is the command that is actually used for listing the files in the current directory that I have. So, by default ls is used to list the files in the current directory, but it could also be used to list the files in any other directory by providing it with an argument. So, let us say that for example, I am in my home directory currently, and I want to see the contents of another directory, like for example /tmp. So, as we saw in the previous module, tmp is basically a directory location where all my temporary files are going to be stored, and if I want to see the contents of the /tmp directory when I am physically present in the current shell in my home directory, I could say ls space /tmp, right. So, it will now list me all the files and the subdirectories that is available inside my /tmp directory. So, there are different options to the ls command that is also available. So, an option in Unix command is typically a mechanism by which I enable certain very specific functionality of that particular command. So, by the name option, just like the name option denotes, it is not mandatory for us to include the option every time we try to run the command, but if at all we need to exercise certain specific functionality of the command, then we need to use that particular option along with the command name in the command line. So, let us see a few options of the ls command. All options in any Unix command always have to start with the hyphen or the minus symbol, right. So, as you see here you have ls minus a, the a stands for all. So, now what does this all mean is, we were talking about the hidden files in Unix, wherein any file name that is actually starting with a dot character is considered as a hidden file. By default the ls command will not list all the hidden files, and if I want to see the contents of the hidden files also, I need to specify this minus a option. So, when I say minus a, all file names that is actually starting with a dot, that is considered as a hidden file by the definition of hidden file in Unix, will also be getting listed whenever I use the minus a option here, right. Then another option is minus l, which actually stands for the long. If I want to know more details about every file and subdirectory that is available in a particular directory, like for example the permissions on that particular entry, the size of the file or the directory, right. If I want to know who is owning that file and when has it been modified and so on, then I will typically make use of the minus l option. So, if I say ls minus l, it will give me more details about the each and every entry that is actually present in that particular directory. So, the minus l stands for long. ls minus t stands for time. It basically sorts the list of files in such a way that my recent files will be getting listed at the top, and the older files which has been modified much earlier will be getting listed down below that. So, in the order of the modification time of the files in that particular directory, the ls minus t option will be listing me the contents of that particular directory. So, ls minus capital S, okay. So, we just saw in the previous module that the command name is actually sensitive, the file name is actually case sensitive. Just like that, file names are case sensitive, the options to every command in Unix is also case sensitive. So, we need to be little careful with respect to what option we use. So, ls minus capital S will basically sort the output of my ls command based on the size of the file. So, the biggest files will be listed first, and the smaller files in terms of the size will be listed below. ls minus r will typically reverse the sort order. So, for example, if I say ls minus ltr, right. So, minus l means it is long listing as we seen here, minus t means we saw that it is the most recent files first, but what has actually happened is I am introducing the option of r along with the minus t option here, right. So, what is going to happen is the minus r option is reversing the sort order of the minus t. So, what does it mean? Because minus t by default is going to list the recent files first, and we are reversing the sort order. When we use minus ltr, it is actually going to have the most recent files listed at the end of the listing instead of the beginning of the listing, right. So, that is one example of the minus r option. Likewise, I could use minus r even with minus capital S, in which case the files that are the biggest will be at the end of the listing rather than at the beginning of the listing. So, likewise I do have many different options of the ls command, but what we have actually seen here is only some of the very common options that you would need to make use of typically with an ls command. So, along with the options, I could also do what is called as a file name pattern substitution in the ls. Now, if you see this example ls star txt, star is what we refer to as a regular expression pattern, which would typically stand for 0 or more characters. Now, what we mean when we say star txt is that I want to substitute star with 0 or more characters and any character, right, but the name of the file or the directory should always be ending with txt, because I do not have anything after that here, right. So, what the command will try to list down here is that it will try to find out all the names that are actually ending with txt in the current directory and then list them down line by line, right. So, that is basically because of the fact that I am using the ls. So, here if I have let us say 2 files which are ending with txt or 5 files ending with txt, but I do not know the names of the files to be explicitly mentioning here as part of the command line, I could actually use this mechanism where a regular expression character like star will replace any number of characters in that particular position, but it always have to be ending with txt because that is the pattern that I have actually given here, right. Now, look at this ls minus d dot star, another example wherein I am going to have all the names starting with dot, and if at all any of those names starting with a dot is a directory, with the minus d option we are saying that do not go inside the directory, that particular directory, and display the contents of the directory also, but just display me the directory name alone, right. So, dot star will typically expand or rather substitute to any pattern that is actually starting with a dot followed by 0 or more characters. So, any kind of hidden files will be matched by this particular regular expression pattern, and because of the fact that we have used minus d, if this regular expression pattern is a directory name, it will only display the name of the directory alone as part of the file listing and not go into each and every content of that particular subdirectory. If you come into the next example cat, you see the question mark dot log. The question mark here stands for one single character. So, any file name which actually has one character at the starting followed by dot log will be matched by this particular pattern substitution. So, let us say that in my particular directory in which I am running this command, if there is a file name called a.log, okay, that particular file name will be matched by this pattern substitution because the question mark stands for exactly one character. On the other hand, if I have a file name in the same directory which has the name of let us say aa.log, right, that particular file name will not be matched by this because there are 2 characters aa before my dot log, but the pattern here is saying that it should be only one character. So, the file name a.log will match with this particular pattern substitution, but the file name aa.log for example will not substitute for this particular pattern substitution because of the fact that I have 2 characters before the dot log in that particular file name. So, there are some special directories that we need to understand whenever we are dealing with the Unix operating system. One special directory is what is referred to as a dot. So, the dot here stands for the current directory. So, wherever my shell process is currently executing the commands, that directory becomes my current directory. So, later on we will see how I could actually change the current directory, but the dot character in the command line is a representation that it is being referred to the current directory in that particular location. So, for example, if I say dot slash readme.txt and if I also say it as a readme.txt, both are actually one and the same, because readme.txt, if you recall what we talked about in the file path, it is not starting with slash, that means it is a relative path to my current location. So, when it is a current location, that is nothing but my dot slash, because dot as just discussing stands for the current directory, right. So, the dot here whether I say dot slash readme.txt or readme.txt, both would actually mean one and the same, and we will be actually seeing where we would be using the current directory as a dot in extensive detail in our subsequent modules. While dot represents the current directory, there is also another special directory called as a dot dot directory. Now, what is a dot dot directory is? It is a parent directory of the current directory, right. So, because we will have to understand that the entire file system in Unix is typically a tree based model where you have a parent, you have a child and also a grandchild and so on in the hierarchy. So, every file name will be present inside a particular directory, and that directory will have a parent. Likewise, it will be going up till the root. So, the root alone will not have the parent directory, right. So, if I want to basically refer to the parent directory, you will find that programmers will generally make use of dot dot to refer to the parent directory of my current directory location. So, for example, if I want to change into my parent directory of wherever I am right now, I will say cd dot dot. So, as we will see later, cd is basically a command to do change directory. So, I am basically telling I want to do a change directory from the current directory into my parent directory. So, that is the reason why you find dot dot being mentioned here. Then another kind of a special directory is what we refer to as the tilde directory, where this will refer to the home directory of the current user. So, as we were discussing right now, Unix being a multi-user operating system, every user has something called as a home directory, in which he will be typically logged in as soon as he comes into the system, and from that home directory he will be expected to go to whichever other directory he wants to go. Now, as part of the script or as part of referring to a file, if there is a requirement to refer to the home directory, this particular character is actually a short form of representation which will directly refer to the home directory of the currently logged in user, right. On the other hand, if we actually follow the special character with the name of a user, it represents that we want to go to the home directory of this particular user who has been actually mentioned here, right. So, the essential difference is, if I do not specify the username after this tilde directory, it refers to my own home directory, but on the other hand, if I refer to a username after this tilde directory, it refers to the home directory of that particular user. So, if I say, for example, cd, the command that we actually saw in the previous slide, and then say cd tilde Sydney, that means I want to change my current directory to the home directory of the Sydney user. On the other hand, if I say cd space tilde, it means that I want to just change to my own home directory, right. So, these are very powerful shortcut mechanisms by which we will be able to refer to different types of files, and also special type of directories which will come in extremely handy for us when we actually start running small or very complex scripts on our Unix system. So, this brings us to the end of this particular module.